You've made a mistake.
The new CEO fired me before 9 o'clock on her first morning. She called my 25 years of service outdated overhead, ordered security to drag me out in front of the entire board, and smiled as if humiliating an old man were the first successful decision of her career. But she never noticed the silver pen in my hand, and she never asked why one chair at the table had been left empty. Hello, my name is Walter Jenkins. I was 62 years old that morning, and for 25 years, Aerofreight Corporation had been more than my employer. I had helped build it from a struggling regional cargo company into one of the largest private logistics networks in the United States. I knew every runway we used, every warehouse we owned, and nearly every mistake the company had survived. I also knew one secret that the new CEO did not. The empty chair was reserved for me. That Monday morning, I entered the boardroom carrying 12 yellow roses. Our founder, Samuel Mercer, used to keep yellow roses in his office because his late wife had loved them. After Samuel died, I continued the tradition whenever a new executive joined the company. The boardroom was on the 42nd floor of our headquarters in Chicago. Rain pressed against the windows, turning the city below into a gray blur. Victoria Croft sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She was 38, sharply dressed, perfectly calm, and already surrounded by the people she had chosen to promote. Her chief of staff, Nolan Pierce, sat to her right. The new finance director, Melissa Grant, sat beside him. Two security officers waited near the glass doors. That should have warned me. Walter Jenkins, Victoria said, without offering her hand. Your time here is over. No greeting, no thank you. She did not even look at the roses. She pushed a thick folder across the table. Your separation documents. Human Resources has already prepared everything. I looked around the room. Several board members avoided my eyes. Others stared at Victoria with visible discomfort. At the far end of the table stood an empty leather chair. A small brass plate had been removed from its place. Victoria followed my gaze and laughed softly. That seat is being removed, she said. It belonged to a position that no longer serves this company. Does it? I asked. Her smile disappeared. You were hired in another era, Walter. Your systems are old, your methods are slow, your compensation is unjustifiable. 25 years of service does not make you valuable. It makes you expensive. Nolan leaned back in his chair, enjoying every word. I placed the roses on the credenza behind me. May I ask what position you believe I hold? Victoria tapped the folder with one finger. Senior Operations Advisor. A ceremonial title created by Samuel Mercer because he was sentimental. That answer told me everything. She had not read the complete governance file. Security, she said. Please escort Mr. Jenkins from the building. One officer was named Daniel Ruiz. I had helped his wife get emergency medical care 2 years earlier when their insurance claim was delayed. His jaw tightened, but he stepped forward because he had a job to do. Mr. Jenkins, he said quietly, I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Daniel. I picked up the separation folder, but did not sign it. Then I removed my access badge and placed it on the table. Victoria glanced at the silver pen in my right hand. You can leave company property here as well. I looked down at the pen. Samuel had given it to me on the company's 10th anniversary. His initials were engraved near the clip. This is mine, I said. Then take it and go. I nodded. As Daniel escorted me toward the door, I stopped beside the empty chair. You should find the brass nameplate, I told Victoria. Before the 10 o'clock meeting. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. There is no 10 o'clock meeting. There is now. The room went silent. Then I left. People watched from their desks as security walked me through the operations floor. Some looked angry. A few stood up. I raised one hand and asked them to stay calm. I did not want loyalty to me to cost anyone a paycheck. At the elevator, my longtime assistant Claire Donnelly hurried toward us. Her face was pale. Walter, Victoria made her first mistake. The Claire glanced at the folder under my arm. She fired you. Publicly. Can she do that? As CEO, she can terminate an operations advisor. Claire stared at me, waiting. But she cannot remove the voting representative of the Mercer Legacy Trust. Her eyes widened. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside with Daniel, then turned back to Claire. "Find the nameplate," I said, "and do not use the company network." The doors closed. In the lobby, Daniel returned my badge to me instead of placing it in the security box. "Sir, I think you may need this." I handed it back. "If Victoria checks the access records and sees that I used it after being fired, she will blame you. Keep it." He swallowed. "What are you going to do?" I held up the silver pen. "I'm going to honor a promise." 26 years earlier, Samuel Mercer had invited me into a rented warehouse near Midway Airport. Aerofreight owned 3 trucks, leased 1 small aircraft, and owed more money than it had in the bank. Samuel was brilliant, stubborn, and terrible with paperwork. I was an Army logistics officer looking for a second career. We built the company together. Samuel owned it. I operated it. When fuel prices surged, I redesigned our routes. When a competitor tried to force us into bankruptcy, I found the false invoices that exposed its scheme. When one of our aircraft made an emergency landing in Kansas, I stayed awake for 36 hours coordinating families, regulators, and repairs. Samuel offered me stock more than once. I refused. I had watched money destroy my father and divide my brothers. I wanted a salary, honest work, and the freedom to sleep at night. Samuel found another way. 6 years before his death, he created the Mercer Legacy Trust. It held 37% of Aerofreight's voting shares. The trust could not be sold, divided, or transferred for 40 years. Its purpose was to protect employees, prevent reckless takeovers, and preserve the safety standards Samuel considered sacred. Samuel named me its sole voting representative. My public title remained Senior Operations Advisor. My real authority activated only when the company faced a leadership crisis, a threat to suspected financial misconduct. The silver pen was ceremonial, but the document it had signed was not. And 3 nights before Victoria fired me, I had received an anonymous package. Inside were copies of altered maintenance reports, hidden debt agreements, and a planned sale of our aircraft maintenance division to a shell company. The shell company was controlled by Nolan Pierce, Victoria's chief of staff. At 9:17 that morning, I entered a coffee shop across the street from headquarters. I sat in the back booth and opened the separation folder. Buried beneath the termination letter was a confidentiality agreement. It offered me 18 months of salary if I promised not to discuss any company matter with regulators, employees, investors, or law enforcement. The agreement covered events that had not yet happened. That was their second mistake. My phone rang. The caller was Helen Shaw, Aerofreight's general counsel. "Walter," she whispered. "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Do not sign anything." "I wasn't planning to." "Victoria ordered me to certify an emergency restructuring. She wants to sell the maintenance division by Friday to Northstar Aviation Holdings." Helen went quiet. "How do you know that name?" "Because someone sent me their private financing records." I heard her office door close. "Walter, Northstar was incorporated 7 weeks ago. Its registered address is a mailbox in Delaware. And its beneficial owner. The records are sealed. Not all of them." I opened the anonymous package on the table. One page showed a transfer from Northstar to a consulting company owned by Nolan's brother. Helen drew a slow breath. "What do you need from me?" "Call a special meeting of the board for 10 o'clock. Victoria will block it." "She can't." Section 14 of the trust agreement. There was another silence. Then Helen said, "She doesn't know." "No." "Should I tell her?" I looked through the coffee shop window at Aerofreight's glass tower. Not yet. At 9:31, Victoria sent a company-wide email announcing my retirement. She thanked me for my long service and said the company was moving toward a faster, younger, more innovative future. 12 minutes earlier, she had ordered security to remove me. Now she was rewriting the scene before witnesses could describe it. I forwarded the email to my personal attorney, Rebecca Sloan. Rebecca had represented Samuel when he created the trust. At 69, she had a calm voice that made dishonest people nervous. She met me at the coffee shop, carrying a leather briefcase. I assume your morning went badly, she said. Better than Victoria's morning is going to end. I showed her the termination documents and the anonymous package. Rebecca read every page slowly. This confidentiality agreement is extraordinary, she said. It attempts to restrict reports to federal regulators. That clause is probably unenforceable, but including it suggests intent. That's what I thought. She examined the maintenance reports. 3 aircraft had failed internal inspection because of hairline cracks in landing gear components. The original reports ordered immediate replacement. The altered versions changed the status from ground aircraft to monitor during routine service. Those planes were scheduled to fly within 48 hours. My anger turned cold. This was no longer about my job. It was about crews, passengers, and families waiting for people to come home. I called our director of flight safety. Ground aircraft 6 722 and 904, I said, on whose authority? Mine, under emergency trust powers. Marcus did not argue. Done. Use mechanical failure codes. Do not mention the documents yet. Rebecca closed the folder. If Victoria and Nolan altered federal maintenance records, they may face criminal charges. We need proof of who ordered it. And proof that these copies are authentic. My phone vibrated with a message from Claire. Nolan THIWDIHBN. IVIT. Under the message was a photograph. The brass plate read, Marfier Lugas Etirusti. I sent Claire a new instruction. Bring it to the boardroom at 10:00. Say nothing until I arrive. At 9:48, Helen called again. The meeting is scheduled, she said. Victoria is furious. She says you have no authority because she terminated you. My employment and my trust position are legally separate. I explained that. How did she respond? She told me to update my resume, document it. Rebecca and I crossed the street at 9:53. Daniel stood inside the lobby. When he saw us, he unlocked the executive elevator without a word. You may want to check the 42nd floor camera records, he said quietly. Nolan met Victoria at 6012 this morning. He carried 2 document boxes into the boardroom. He left with one. Can you preserve the footage? Already copied it to the legal archive. Thank you, Daniel. He nodded once. The boardroom doors were closed when we arrived. Victoria's voice carried through the glass. This is an attempted coup by a bitter former employee. Helen answered, Walter's authority comes from the trust, not his employment contract. Then remove the trust. You cannot remove a shareholder. Rebecca opened the door. Conversation stopped. Every board member was present. Victoria sat at the head of the table, with Nolan beside her. Claire stood at the far end holding the brass nameplate. The empty chair remained where it had been. Victoria looked at me. You are trespassing. Rebecca placed her briefcase on the table. I'm Rebecca Sloan, counsel for the Mercer Legacy Trust. Mr. Jenkins is here as the trust's lawful voting representative. Nolan whispered something into Victoria's ear. Her expression hardened. That trust owns non-controlling shares, 37%, I said, the largest single voting bloc in aero freight. Not a majority. No, but enough to call an emergency session. Enough to demand records, and enough, with the support of 2 independent directors, to suspend a chief executive pending investigation. Victoria looked around the table. The directors who had avoided my eyes earlier now sat straighter. Claire walked forward and returned the brass plate to its place before the empty chair. I sat down. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Victoria laughed. This is theater. A nameplate and an antique pen do not run a corporation. You're right, I said. Evidence does. Rebecca distributed copies of the maintenance reports, debt agreements, and Northstar transfers. Nolan's face changed first. Victoria did not look at him. She kept reading. These are fabricated, she said. Then you will support an independent forensic audit. I replied. Absolutely not. Confidential transaction records cannot be handed to outsiders because an angry retiree received an anonymous envelope. You called it fabricated before you knew what the records contained. Her eyes lifted to mine. That was her third mistake. Director Elaine Porter, chair of the audit committee, turned to Nolan. "Did you disclose that your brother owns Pierce Strategic Consulting?" Nolan's voice remained smooth. "My brother's business has no relationship with Aerofreight." Elaine held up the transfer record. "Northstar paid his firm $2 million. I cannot explain the activities of every company that hires him." "You proposed Northstar as the buyer," Helen said. Nolan pushed back from the table. "This meeting is improper. Victoria, end it." I uncapped the silver pen. "Before she does, I am making 3 emergency motions. First, preserve all records connected to Northstar, maintenance inspections, and executive communications. Second, suspend the sale. Third, place Victoria Croft and Nolan Pierce on administrative leave until an independent investigation is completed." Victoria stood. "I will not allow this. You do not control the vote. Neither do you. Let's find out." The trust voted yes. Elaine voted yes. 2 more independent directors joined us. The motion passed by a narrow margin. Victoria stared at the board secretary, as if the woman had betrayed her personally. "This company hired me to transform it," she said. "The company hired you to lead it," I replied, "not strip it for parts." Nolan reached for his phone. Daniel and another security officer entered. "All company devices remain in the room," Helen said. "That includes phones and laptops." Victoria's face went white. Then every light in the boardroom went out. Emergency lights came on 3 seconds later, filling the room with a dim red glow. The doors automatically unlocked. Nolan ran. He shoved past Daniel, crossed the reception area, and disappeared into the stairwell. Victoria stayed beside her chair. "I had nothing to do with this," she said. "No one had accused her yet." Daniel called building security. I called Marcus and told him to confirm that the 3 aircraft remained grounded. He did. Then he gave me worse news. Someone tried to override the grounding order from Victoria's executive credentials. When? 2 minutes ago. I looked at Victoria's laptop. It was closed on the table. Was the request successful? No. Your emergency code outranks hers. Lock all flight status changes until further notice. Already done. The building's backup power restored the lights. Claire checked the cabinet where the board stored original transaction files. 1 drawer was open. The Northstar acquisition binder was gone. I remembered what Daniel had said. Nolan entered with 2 boxes and left with 1. The missing binder must have been in the second box. Victoria picked up her purse. "Since I am supposedly on leave, I'm going home." Rebecca stepped between her and the door. "You may leave after surrendering company devices." "You have no authority to detain me." "She's correct," I said. "Let her go." Rebecca looked at me. I nodded toward the camera above the door. If Victoria believed she was free, she might lead us to whatever Nolan was trying to protect. She placed her phone and laptop on the table but kept her purse. Then she walked out. Daniel found Nolan 17 floors below. He had removed his jacket and tie and tried to blend in with a group of maintenance contractors. In his backpack were 2 encrypted drives and a paper shredder bag filled with fragments. Chicago police arrived soon afterward. So did representatives from the Federal Aviation Administration. Helen had contacted them as soon as she saw the altered safety reports. By noon, the 42nd floor had become a controlled investigation site. The anonymous package was real. Digital signatures showed the original inspection reports had been uploaded by 3 senior mechanics. The altered versions had been approved using credentials assigned to Nolan's office. But there was a problem. The approval logs showed my name, Walter Jenkins. For 25 years, I had been the final authority on emergency maintenance. Someone had used an archived version of my electronic signature to approve the changes. Victoria had not fired me only because I was expensive. She needed me out of the building before the altered reports were discovered. And she needed the board to believe I was angry. At 1:20, 2 police detectives asked me to remain available for questioning. At 1:35, a business news channel reported that a former Aerofreight executive was suspected of manipulating safety documents. My name appeared on the screen. Victoria's public relations team had moved faster than the investigators. My phone filled with messages. Some offered support. Others asked whether I had endangered crews. One reporter called me a disgraced executive before anyone had interviewed me. For the first time that day, I felt afraid. Not for my job. That no longer mattered. I was afraid that 25 years of trust could be destroyed in 25 minutes. I called my daughter, Emily. She was a public school principal in Wisconsin and had never cared about corporate politics. "Dad," she said, "I did not alter those reports." "Then I believe you." Her answer came so quickly that I could not speak. "Are you safe?" she asked. "Then stop trying to protect everyone by yourself." After we ended the call, I sat alone in Samuel's old office. The company had preserved it as a small conference room. His photograph still hung on the wall. I turned the silver pen between my fingers. Samuel once told me that loyalty was not silence. Real loyalty meant stopping a friend from driving toward a cliff, even if you had to take away his keys. I had spent years protecting Aerofreight quietly. Now quiet protection was not enough. Claire entered and closed the door. "I think I know who sent the package," she said. She placed a photograph on the desk. It showed a young mechanic named Luis Ortega, accepting a safety award from me 3 years earlier. "Luis disappeared from the schedule last Friday," Claire said. "Human Resources says he resigned. His supervisor says he never did." I remembered Luis. Careful, serious, and unwilling to sign any report he had not personally verified. Claire continued. "He accessed the inspection records the night before the package was delivered. Then his employee account was deleted. Do you have his address?" "No. But his emergency contact is his sister. She owns a diner near Cicero. We gave the information to the investigators, but I could not sit still and wait. Rebecca warned me not to interfere. I promised I only wanted to confirm that Luis was safe." Daniel drove Claire and me to the diner. Luis's sister recognized his photograph. She looked toward the kitchen before answering. "He told me not to talk to anyone from Aerofreight." "I'm not asking where he is," I said. "Just tell him Walter Jenkins received the package." Her expression changed. "You're Walter." I nodded. She led us through the kitchen and into a storage room. Luis sat on an overturned crate with a bandage above his left eye. He stood when he saw me. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to trust. What happened to you?" "Nolan found out I copied the original reports. 2 men followed me after my shift. They took my work phone and warned me to leave Chicago." Daniel immediately called the detectives. Luis reached inside his coat and handed me a small memory card. The package wasn't everything. On the card was an audio recording. Luis had left his phone recording inside an inspection office after Nolan arrived with Victoria. Their voices were clear. Nolan ordered the maintenance manager to replace the safety reports. The manager refused. Then Victoria spoke. "Use Jenkins's archived signature. By the time anyone finds the cracks, he'll be gone and the division will belong to North Star." Nolan asked what would happen if one of the aircraft failed. Victoria answered with a sentence I will never forget. "It only has to survive until Friday." The room felt colder. This was not reckless ignorance. It was deliberate. We turned the recording over to the investigators. They verified its metadata and matched the voices against recorded executive calls. Meanwhile, Victoria had vanished. Her driver said she dismissed him outside her apartment. Her passport was gone. A private aircraft connected to North Star had filed a flight plan from a small airport in Indiana to the Cayman Islands. The aircraft was scheduled to depart at 40:40. It was already 30:55. I called Helen. "Who insures North Star's aircraft?" She checked. Aerofreight Risk Services. That was a small subsidiary Samuel had created years earlier. Then suspend the policy under the fraud clause. That could prevent takeoff. That's the idea. At 40:12, the policy was suspended. At 4:19, at the airport refused clearance. At 40:27, federal agents found Victoria sitting inside the aircraft with 2 suitcases, $400,000 in cash, and the missing North Star binder. But the greatest shock was inside the binder. North Star was not planning to buy the maintenance division with its own money. Victoria had secretly pledged Aerofreight's pension fund as collateral. If the sale failed, thousands of employees could have lost part of their retirement. She had not been modernizing the company. She had been robbing the people who built it. 3 days later, the board assembled in the same room. This time, no one removed my nameplate. The yellow roses I had brought on Monday were still on the credenza. Claire had placed them in water. A few petals had fallen, but most remained bright. Victoria and Nolan were absent. Both were in federal custody while prosecutors prepared charges related to fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and falsification of aviation safety records. Their attorneys insisted they were innocent. The courts would decide their criminal guilt. The board had another decision to make. Elaine Porter opened the meeting. "Walter, the directors would like to offer you the position of interim chief executive." Everyone looked toward me. 25 years earlier, that offer would have felt like victory. On that morning, it felt like a test. "No," I said. Several directors looked surprised. Elaine leaned forward. "May I ask why?" "Because this company does not need another leader chosen behind closed doors." I placed a written proposal on the table. It required a national search for a permanent CEO, employee representation on the safety committee, independent protection for whistleblowers, and public disclosure of major related party transactions. It also required the company to repay every dollar taken from the pension fund, even if executive bonuses had to be canceled. "I will serve for 90 days, I said, "long enough to stabilize operations and help choose the right person. After that." The one director frowned. "You could have complete control." "That is exactly why I should not keep it." The proposal passed unanimously. My first action as interim CEO was to reinstate every employee Victoria had dismissed during her short preparation period. My second was to create a protected reporting channel managed outside the executive office. My third was personal. I asked Luis Ortega to come to the boardroom. He entered wearing his mechanic's uniform. The bruise near his eye had turned yellow. He looked uncomfortable beneath the attention of people in expensive suits. "Luis," I said, "you protected 3 flight crews and this entire company when senior executives ordered you to remain silent." I offered him a promotion in flight safety and a company-funded engineering program. "Mr. Jenkins, I don't want a reward for doing my job." "Good," I said. "We don't need people who chase rewards. We need people who understand the job." He accepted. Daniel Ruiz became head of executive security after the investigation confirmed that he had preserved evidence and prevented unauthorized access without violating procedure. Helen remained general counsel. Claire became director of corporate governance, which was the title she deserved after years of quietly keeping better records than half the executive floor. And me, I finally signed a separation document, not the one Victoria had given me. 92 days after she fired me, I signed my resignation as interim CEO with Samuel's silver pen. The board selected Dr. Maya Bennett, an aviation engineer who had spent 18 years working in safety, operations, and labor relations. She was not the loudest candidate. She did not promise to disrupt everything by Friday. She asked questions. She listened to mechanics. She read the trust agreement before entering the boardroom. On her first morning, I brought her 12 yellow roses. She stood when I entered. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, "I believe that chair belongs to you." She pointed to the seat at the far end of the table. My brass nameplate was waiting. I sat down. But before the meeting began, Maya asked me why Samuel had chosen a silver pen as the symbol of the trust. I told her the truth. During Aerofreight's first year, Samuel and I could afford only one reliable pen between us. We used it to sign payroll checks, aircraft leases, fuel agreements, and the first health insurance plan for our 12 employees. Years later, when the company became successful, Samuel had a silversmith cover that cheap pen in sterling silver. He said value does not come from appearance. I told her, it comes from what something has carried and what it refuses to betray. The criminal case lasted nearly a year. Nolan eventually pleaded guilty and agreed to testify. Victoria went to trial. The audio recording, the altered reports, the pension documents, and the cash from the aircraft left the jury with little doubt. She was convicted. The judge ordered restitution, and Aerofreight recovered millions through seized assets and insurance claims. The pension fund was made whole. No aircraft flew with the damaged landing gear. That mattered more to me than any headline. Still, one final moment gave me a satisfaction I will admit I enjoyed. At Victoria's sentencing, her attorney described her as a visionary executive destroyed by resistant older employees. The prosecutor played the boardroom security video. On the courtroom screen, Victoria called me outdated overhead. She ordered security to remove me. She laughed at the empty chair and dismissed the silver pen as an antique. Then the video showed me pausing at the door. You should find the brass nameplate, I had told her. Before the 10 o'clock meeting, Victoria watched herself make the mistake that uncovered everything. For 1 second, she looked at me across the courtroom. I felt no hatred. Hatred would have tied me to her. After sentencing, a reporter waited outside. "Mr. Jenkins," she called, "do you consider this revenge?" I thought about the question. Revenge would have been using my power to humiliate Victoria as she humiliated me. Revenge would have been destroying people simply because they had stood on the wrong side of the room. That was not what happened. Employees kept their pensions. Crews kept their safety. A whistleblower found protection. A company learned that experience was not the enemy of progress. No, I told the reporter, revenge is about making someone suffer. Justice is about making sure they can never do the same harm again. I returned to Aerofreight that afternoon. From the 42nd floor, Chicago looked clear after days of rain. Maya was meeting with pilots. Luis was inspecting the new maintenance reporting system. Claire had placed fresh yellow roses beside Samuel's photograph. I sat in the chair Victoria had tried to erase and laid the silver pen on the table. 25 years of service had taught me that titles could disappear overnight. Offices could be taken. Reputations could be attacked. Even loyal people could be escorted out beneath the eyes of those they once protected. But real authority was never the chair, the badge, or the title. It was the trust you earned when no one was watching. Victoria saw an old employee holding an old pen beside an empty chair. She never understood that the pen carried a promise, the chair carried a vote, and the man she tried to erase carried the truth. And in the end, the truth was the only thing in that boardroom she could not fire.